Okay, so I recorded this video already and I finished it, and then later when I looked up to start doing timestamps for it, by the way, timestamps, I'm going to show you where whenever I change subjects, they're going to be in the description. When I went to start looking at timestamps, I saw that the first 25 minutes of this didn't have any audio. So I'm redoing this. It's going to be good. There's going to be a very distinct cut, and by cut I mean I downloaded it and you're going to get to watch it on VLC. It's going to be great. It's probably not going to line up very well because I'm not entirely sure. Well, I mean, I vaguely know what I was talking about, but whatever, the conversation won't flow. Okay, so just gonna start off. So this is a continuation of my previous video. This is more of a general thing. There's not anything particularly specific to a set of course in this. It's just general texture painting in Blender. First thing we're going to look at is layering. So you can do layering in Blender when you're painting objects. So this, I already have composited this in Photoshop, and then I brought it back in here. So if we look at this, this is, let's just make this a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay, so this is the node. Actually, I'm gonna bring it up. This is the node tree for this. So the way that layering, the way that I've found is easiest to do layering. So you have your image texture, you have all of your different textures. You have them go into a mix node. This is a let's see, it's, what is it under? Color mix RGB. So that's what this is. So you put the color for both of them into this, take the alpha for, I do it from the bottom, although you could flip this the other way. So this is the base level, this is the next one on top of it, this is the next one on top of it. So if you want to flip that makes more sense to you, that's fine. But you see the alpha goes into each mix layer to define which parts of it are transparent and which aren't. I'll go into diffuse, blah, blah, whatever. There's an empty image texture here, which you will see later why that is there and why those are important. So in text to draw, let's go to mix mode. Right, palettes, those are something which I did not show. So you can have different palettes. This is from the one I just recorded, but I didn't, whatever. So create a new palette with a little plus arrow. So it looks the same, but you have these little plus and minus arrows up the top. So you can select whatever color you want, create it there, and then we press the plus, it gets you a little thing, and then you can do a quick swap over supposedly X. I've never been able to get that to work, but you can do, you know, whatever palette creation you want, and then easily click between them. Do material painting mode. This way it shows all of the textures that you have in that node tree. Oh, that's interesting. Just moved. Anyway, so this is the three that I'm using, and then that's the empty one, so we can just ignore that. So 4 is the top one, and then if we do this, we see that that's not painted on there. And then if we go to the one underneath it, choose a different color, and it's a layer, it behaves like a layer. And okay, so there's some options here which are somewhat important. Occlude. So this turns off, let's turn off all of them. So what occlusion does is it says, okay, there's a face back there, but it's behind this face. So if I paint here, if occlusion is on, it won't paint like that, which it's off, so it does. Culling is a somewhat similar thing. So this is like the back of the object, and then this is the front of it. So without culling on, we can paint on the back of an object. If we turn it on, we can no longer paint on the back of an object. Normal has a somewhat similar effect, where it only allows you to draw on faces which have normals. Where are we going? Edit mode. Nope. Shows face normals. So all these little lines point off in the direction of which way the face is facing. So you see the normals don't go inside, but they are pointed outside. The game uses this for rendering stuff, and it just has, you know, whatever other uses. It's just part of the mesh. But if you have this on, you can control how far away the normals point. So it's set on 30 degrees. So if the normals are pointing within 30 degrees of where the angle we were painting from, if they're within that area, they can be painted. If they weren't, then they're not. So if we put that down to something really small like 5, and we switched to a different color, you see it cuts it off earlier. Yeah, it looks like it actually does a little gradient thing, so that's somewhat nice. Right, back to the options. So that's normal. I generally don't use that. Not sure what cavity mask is. Mask painting, I don't know. I guess that wouldn't let you paint in like that area or something. But I usually would leave occlude and culling on. Those are the two that I'd probably recommend using. Let's see. It's layers. It's that. There is. I have my video over here so I can see if I'm missing anything. Oh, it's useful to know the hotkeys between this. So, mix is your normal paint mode. That's click on this and you can press X, and then erase is the mode which erases it to alpha. And that's really useful to just be able to click between those two. Let's see. Oh, of course there is symmetry, which I want to erase. Which I believe I showed in my other thing. But that's symmetry. You can paint things and they're symmetrical. I wouldn't recommend using Y or X or Y or Z symmetry because these aren't really symmetrical in those directions, so it doesn't do anything particularly useful. Let's see. Some stuff with stenciling. So this is a stencil that I have, whatever I used it to paint on that. There you see it lined up. So I did one side in symmetry and then switch over to the other side and lined it up. You can do the thing which I did in my first video with creating a mesh and then lining it up to the separate mesh. It's more time consuming, but if you it could be useful if you want to set like an absolute boundary left and right, and then have like a height somewhere in the middle, and you don't want to just eyeball it. That would be useful. But there's some other things that I have. So this, look, it's blank white.png. This is literally just a 1x1 or 1x2. Yeah, it's like a 1x2 blank, or full white image texture. And the reason that it is full white, and the reason that it is just a such a small pixelage is because you don't need a great size if you just want straight edges. So right click, drag it around, and then let's control click, rotate it. say we want like a body line that goes like that. And then let's say it like meets in a V over there. So what we do is we turn on symmetry, but it's fully white, which means that whatever color we select that we're painting with, it will paint all of that color on that stencil area. So now you have a little, whatever that is. But that's a useful thing to have around. There's also, what I would recommend is having a circle. So this is an inverted version. And with this, I just, went into Photoshop and then did a circle selection, fill it, or in this case, circle selection, invert selection, fill that. And this is at a 2K by 2K texture size. But you can use this, and you can do scaling on the X or on the Y to give you different shapes. So you can do there we go. So you can do curves very easily without, with a stencil, and not having to freehand it if you're bad at freehanding. So now you have a little curve thing, and because you can transform, you can independently, so that's shift right click, you can independently transform X and Y scaling. You can get whatever type of curve you want, whether it's more or less curved than a normal sphere would be. Okay, that's that. There is selection of, so there's this little button down here. So what this does is basically, oh, that's interesting. Okay, so basically it goes into edit mode, and you can press tab and go into edit mode yourself. And you can select things, and then when you go back to paint mode, it will only allow you to paint on that specific selection of faces. So what you can do is you can go into edit mode. I kind of like to go into edit mode just because it's, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. You can do, so like this is in texture paint mode, so if I left click, it'll do texture painting, but if I do C to do the edit modes selection tool, you can see that it just brings up the tool and then allows you to select meshes. But in edit mode, you can get wireframe, which you can't get in texture drawing mode, which is one thing that I usually like doing. So let's say we want to select this area here. So we have, oh, that is selected. So we have this area. And if we go back into paint mode, so this area is selected, that one's not. We have symmetry on, but if we draw on this area, and then we look at the other one, it doesn't do anything because it restricts painting to just that area. So what we would do is, actually I wonder if we can do it. No, we can't. So in edit mode, Shift G, which selects similar, and then do face regions, and it will select what it believes to be, like a region of the same type of faces, which it does pretty well for the most part. Sometimes it can get confused, but for the most part it's pretty good. And now you have that side selected as well, and you can finish doing whatever you want. Okay, so that's that, and you can of course turn that on and off, or you could leave it always on and just use A to select nothing or everything, and then do it like that. I don't know why it keeps on going to that area. It's kind of weird. So that is that. You can also do, you can use the same thing to separate pieces from the rest of the mesh. So like say I just want to work on this bit of the mirror. I want to work on both of them, so Shift G selects the same faces over there. You can do Shift D to duplicate them, Enter to confirm. P separates them into a, ooh, that's interesting. Not texture paint, object mode. Separates them into a separate object. So now we have that and we have that. We can move those to a different layer. We can do whatever we want to them there. Let's see. So that is compositing in a little bit more detail on texture painting. I'm trying to think if there's anything I'm missing in texture painting before I move on. I don't think so. That should be everything. Now let's move on to light painting. So what I've done here is I have I have 3 planes. So I have 3 planes and I have this light up here. So what I've done is this is like a fill light, so it's just like a normal, you know, whatever, it's just a white light with, you know, whatever predefined strength. That's pointing at this. This has a diffuse, you know, just whatever blank diffuse with full white. And when you're doing light painting, it's important that the material is white, because otherwise you'll end up with some, the colors won't come out like you want them to. And let me explain what I mean by light painting real quick. So by light painting, I mean that I am physically rendering how the light would hit this object and bounce around, and all the shadows that it would, you know, would be created. Which is why, so these planes are emission, so they emit light. This one is set up so that you have, this is taking the position of it vertically, you know, position, separate into XYZ vertical, and then it's multiplying that, so it's multiplying that by 0.1, so I get a larger area of selection. And then I have, I'm just going to duplicate that. Oop. That's somewhere. Okay, that's very far away. So let's shrink this a little bit. So I have this color ramp. So this color ramp takes in all values that are, you know, low to high. Usually it's like 0 to 1. But it allows you to take them and change things. So this is taking the color data from the color ramp and putting it into the factor of a mix shader. So that's mixing an emission node that emits light and a transparent node which allows transparency, so that that fill light can come in without any harsh shadows as it goes from emission to non-emission. So I have this set up, and as you can see, the gradient here defines the gradient of transparency to emission, and then you can flip those around, all that good stuff. So that's how I have this set up. And what I'm doing this for is so that I can do a texture bake. So the empty image texture I have here, that's what this is. So this is just using diffuse going into there. Actually, at this point, I think I'm repeating myself from the video I recorded earlier, but I'm just going to finish up this just so I don't miss anything. There may be some repetition. So the empty image texture thing here, yes, I definitely explained this bit. So I think that's actually probably it. I'm just going to go over to this. Oh, one very important thing, which I just remembered was not in the bit that had audio. Okay, well, that's interesting. So let's see. that's fine. So if we select this, go into edit mode so that we can see all the objects. In my previous thing, you probably saw that, so this is the UV. This shows where all the faces line up on the 2D texture as compared to the 3D object. So in my previous thing, all of the UVs were up in this area above them, above the texture. And this allows for tiling of, basically the texture is tiled, so even though the UV isn't on the texture basically gets tiled infinitely and still ends up in the same space under the UV. But for texture baking, it's important that they're in the same area. So moving it along the y-axis, it starts 2048. No, this is 4K. So 4096. So it would be up there, and you'd need to move it down if you're baking it. And that way the texture that you're baking actually goes to the correct area. I think that is it for what I left out. So I'm going to go back to what I recorded earlier and let that play, and I will be listening, and if I remember anything that I've missed or forgotten, I will chime in afterwards. But otherwise, yeah, that's it. I just turned off the monitor for OBS. Okay, so this is what it spit out, but if you want to have it fade to a gradient, you're gonna have to do something in Compositor. So you have the shader node tree, there's the texture node tree, and there's the composite node tree. I'm not sure, I haven't messed with the texture node tree just because it didn't really want to work with me. So you have object nodes, which is here. You have the world nodes, which controls the background of the world. It's think of it as like a skybox. I'm not sure what line style is. Okay, one thing to note about what I just said about that. So the world node, when you're doing texture baking, if you have, so let's say we have this. So this is just blank. There's nothing here. There's no lighting. If we were to bake this, the base color would be whatever the background color is, regardless of the strength. So I talk about doing ambient occlusion stuff later, and for that you do need a strength of the background. At least I'm fairly sure you do. But if you want to do something like this, say you want the bottom of this, say there's no light coming from under here. Like, you know that there's no light, you don't want there to be any light coming from under there, and you want this all to be black because there's no light. If you don't have the background color as absolute 0, wherever no light touches it, it will become the background color. Actually, that reminds me, the one other thing, so this involves rendering, and because you're going to be rendering, you're probably going to want to have Blender use your GPU for rendering. So you would open User Preferences, Cycles Compute Device. Oh, and you also need to make sure you're in Cycles Render, not Blender Render, because they're different engines, and I don't think Blender Render has the capability of doing texture baking. I could be wrong, but Blender Render is really old, or the Blender internal render is really old and no one uses it, so just switch to Cycles if you're planning on doing texture baking. But you want to set a Cycles Compute Device, whether it be OpenCL with the AMD cards or CUDA with NVIDIA. Tick that, and then at the top here under Device you would select GPU Compute. That's that. I'm going to let this play for a little bit longer. I touched it. So in compositing, what I did is I took this texture. So this was a result of baking in, not that, oh, that was another one I played around with. So what I did, this set to a diffuse with, full white, and that's generally how you want to do it. Because otherwise your colors are going to be a little bit tainted. It's not going to be, it's whatever. You can switch this to a reflective shader, like a glossy shader, but if you did that, I would highly recommend having the roughness up a little bit, because otherwise you're going to get some really weird reflections, because baking reflections into a texture just doesn't work. So this is just, diffuse, and then this is a emission thing. The background, or the world material was that black zero strength stuff. So you see on the sides over here, which is this area of the car, and then like the floor of the rear diffuser, whatever. So everything was black unless it was illuminated by this plane up here, which was an emission plane. So that's what I came out with. But let's say that I wanted this not to go from this kind of gray color to black, but I wanted it to be a transparency down into just completely transparent. So in order to do that, what you do is you would take it into the compositor. So that's over here. You have to select use nodes. It pops up with some stuff. You want to get rid of that. But the composite output, this goes to render result. So what I did, took the color, or took the image, I should say. I guess I didn't use the alpha. Yeah, you don't need to pass through the alpha, that's fine. So what I did is I separated the red, green, and blue into a color ramp, and then I used this color ramp. So basically what this is doing is it's saying, and then it's auto-rendering. Okay, so I'm pretty sure the reason that it was rendering here. Now I'll just point to it on this. So I'm pretty sure the reason that it was rendering, and which is why you had that weird audio glitch, is because I had the render result open, and I was also editing the what creates the render result. So from what I'm aware, it was assuming that I wanted to see the difference in the render result immediately, which is why it was calculating that, even though I don't have auto render on. I have auto render on, but it does it for some reason. Hold on, let me just check my sync right now. Okay, that seems all right. So this is saying if the value is, I'm trying to remember which way around this is. Yeah. Okay. So this is saying if the value of this one is in particular is green. So if the value of green is less than 0.010 or 1%, and then this other one is 0.99, whatever. You can move these around and change how transparent something is. But what this does is these are all feeding into a maximum. So this selects the maximum value of these two, and then this one goes into that. So maximum value. That's feeding into the alpha. And these all should be the same. So basically what that's saying is if the color value for any given channel is less than 1%, make it completely transparent, which we can see over here, because there would be, if we go to, actually, there we go, that'll pull up the UV. No, it won't, because that's a render result. Okay, in that case, let's deselect that. If we go to glass, which is what this is pulling from, so this is entirely black. And then if we go to the render result, it spits out that as completely transparent because it's less than 1% of any given color. And then the reason I'm using a color ramp for this is because now you have this gradient here of transparency. So it's saying if the maximum value of any given color is under a certain percent, it'll get more and more transparent. So this way you can have, and I probably wouldn't use that for this type of color thing. I would probably use it as more of a base, but this is just an example because this is what I have at hand right now. So you get transparency while retaining all of the color data because the color data is all, so this separate RGBA goes into a combined RGBA where I add in the alpha based on the color values. And then that's that. Let's see. So I'm just going to zoom this out so it doesn't stress my card too much and hopefully doesn't desync the audio. So this is the lighting that you get. And the texture that you saw is this lighting baked into a texture. So you would go into here, you would select the thing, yes, and this is where that empty texture node I was talking about earlier comes into play. Okay, one thing I want to state here that I forgot to mention is, so generally I would do my, let me bring up this, whenever I'm doing my textures, I generally do them in 4K for a 2K skin, just because the standard text draw, if you're using the mouse, it doesn't have, what's the word? It doesn't have easing or anti-aliasing or anything, so you end up with sharp pixels if you're exporting directly to the exactly to the resolution you're using in game. But the other thing is, if you're doing texture baking, you'll see that there are dots all over the place, and this is because you are sampling. So this is doing ray tracing. So this is tracing each point of light, or it's like casting them from the camera and whatever. It's not important. The thing is, there's a limited number of traces that it can do just feasibly in any given amount of time, and because of this, you end up with a slight like grain that appears. So if this was like a 2K thing, you'd end up, or if this was a 2K skin, 2K render that went into a 2K skin, you'd end up with some kind of nasty grain. So generally, I do a 4K and then scale it down to 2K. And then if you weren't, let's see, so this is at 4K, and then one nice thing is you can drag across things in Blender and do like a divide by 2 or a multiply by 4, whatever. You can do simple kind of stuff like that to easily bump those around. Color, I always start with, just black, but have the alpha at 0 so it's clear behind it. Back to the thing. So we go back to object and we select the object that is currently selected. Okay, ignore that, that's not being used. So what is being used is the diffuse, which is set at, full white, 0 roughness going to the surface. Then we have this. So this is an image texture that's not connected to anything. Now, with it selected, and you have to have it selected, you hit bake, and whatever this is selected as, so this is selected as glass because I was doing this just happened to be what I named the texture. So when you have that, when you have the blank or the non-connected image texture selected in the node for the material of the object, it will bake whatever comes out of the material out based on whatever lighting and stuff you have. And you do have to have selected the object that you want to bake for. So if I was on this, so I want to bake the texture for this object, you have to make sure that it is selected and not, say, the lights around it when you press the bake button. So you have to select the object, and you also want to select the object node street. you also want to have selected the blank image texture, or the unconnected image texture that goes to the texture you want to bake as. It'll bake that into the image that is selected on this. And that's how you get this texture here. Then you can take that into the compositor and you can do that transparency thing, which will come out as render result if you want to do so. And then, you know, saving that is just F3, name it, do whatever you want to do with that. I think that is mostly it. Shift Z to change, so you know, Z to change between wireframe and material. Actually, I think it's solid by default in Blender, but I've changed mine to material, and that way it shows the colors of, you know, whatever textures or colors are applied to the shader. You do Shift V to render out a result, and it will do a live render of whatever you're looking at. So if we render this real quick, so you'll see this is the same blue with the orange thing that I was showing earlier. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So that's kind of baking. Oh, and if you're working, so like this car, for example, let's go back to this. Well, let's move you to layer 9, that's fine. Okay. Oh, and it's doing the compositing thing again. Should be a way that I can turn that off. Anyway, it hasn't been doing that, but I was just messing with it, so I'm assuming that's why it's freaking out a little bit. So this card doesn't have a template from Kunos, which is why I had to bake the ambient occlusion into the model, or bake the ambient occlusion as a texture, which I then pulled in to Photoshop. So if we look at the skin, so this is the ambient occlusion. So what I did for this, which seemed to work out pretty well, is so same thing here with, you know, once you move the UV down into the correct area, diffuse, full white, that's that. And then under world, what I did is I just had the background as full white, strength of 1, because ambient occlusion is, it's kind of measuring how far. You can kind of think about it as how close any mesh is to another bit of the mesh, or, you know, how close any object is close to any other part of the object. So if, like, we go down here, like this area, there's not a whole lot of ways that light can get in here. You know, it's blocked from this side, it's blocked from up here, down. You can really only get in one, or, you know, whatever. It can get into a lot fewer ways than it normally can. So that's why I use an even lighting for that. And then you just go to ambient occlusion, and then you would just bake it normally as a thing. Then you get out that texture. So it would look like this. Let's just hide that. So this is what it would, there we go. So you have transparency, and then it's kind of white, whatever. Oh, and the opacity is on a little bit. Okay. So this is what it would look like. This is the texture that you would get once it's done baking and you save it. So in order to have it work as an actual thing, because if you look, so I, you know, turned on my other skin textures, or, you know, my other layers that I have there, and it's still just all blank white. So what you need to do is you need to take this, and you go to multiply, and then it will shade things properly. And this is because basically it's taking the numeric value of the color, so with white being 1 and the pure black being 0, and it's multiplying it across, or multiplying it against the whatever's underneath it. Yeah, I don't know. Opacity probably doesn't matter that much. It's just what I happened to see in an actual Kunos template, I believe. They had some opacity, so I turned on some opacity. Although actually looking at it, I think it looks better without, so you might not want to do that. Anyway, that's that. I think Content Manager, the showroom, can do some ambient occlusion stuff. I haven't looked at it, but I believe it is possible. I think that pretty much covers it for texture baking, some extra stuff on editing. I think that's pretty much everything. If you guys have any questions, there's a comment section under this video probably. Or you can message me on the Reddit, and I might do another video after this if I get a lot of different questions about specific things. But I think that's it. And with that, the video will be there we go. The video will be over. So yeah, hope this was useful.